Okay. Thank you all so much for joining Pawbox today for our latest webinar, Tips to Improve Email Security for Your Practice. We have a great presentation for you today, but before we get started, let's go over a few housekeeping items. You are all muted. You can ask questions by using the chat function at the bottom of your screen, and I will launch some polling questions after our presentation, after our discussion, and if you could please answer those to the best of your knowledge, that would be great. Please know that there are no wrong answers, so just answer as you can. For a quick overview of today's webinar, I will explain who Pawbox is, then our panelists will give a brief overview of their background, and then we will dive into some discussion questions, wrapping up with a few audience Q&A if time allows. So what is Pawbox? We provide secure HIPAA compliant email for modern healthcare. Senders can write and send emails as normal from any device, and we seamlessly encrypt the message without the need for downloads, plugins, or portals. We are honored that we are currently the #1 email encryption software according to G2, and we are ranked #1 for HIPAA compliant messaging, as well as the best secured email gateway software. At Pawbox, we take securing your data very seriously, which is why we are proud to have Pawbox Email Suite, Standard, Plus, and Premium, as well as our Pawbox Email API, achieve the HITRUST CSF certified status. For those of you who don't know, HITRUST CSF certified status means that our solutions have met key regulatory and industry-defined requirements and are appropriately managing risk. We are the very first HIPAA-compliant email provider to achieve this certification. In August of 2017, we filed a formal patent application and are pleased to announce that all 20 claims for securely communicating email content between sender and recipient were granted. Earlier this year, we announced a $4 million Series A funding led by Arthur Ventures. This is an exciting time for our company, and I personally can't wait to see what we accomplish in the future. Now, let's dive into our panelist introductions. My name is Hannah Trum, and I am the marketing specialist here at Pawbox, and I will be your moderator today. I am thrilled to have our 3 panelists. Patty, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Hannah, for having me on this webinar. My name is Patty Padmanabhan. I am the CEO of Demo Consulting. We are a digital transformation advisory firm that works extensively with health systems.
Thank you, Patty. And Dave, could you please tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, it's an honor to be here. I am Dave Ledoux, CIO of Nijoni Health, which is the largest home care company in Massachusetts. We specialize in mental health patients. We have about 1,000 employees and about 3,500 patients currently under our care.
Thanks, Dave. And last but not least, Greg, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure thing. Hi, everyone. My name is Greg Hoffman. I'm a senior account executive at Pawbox. Been with the company since 2015, and HIPAA compliant email has really been my my bread and butter since then. So been with the company for a while, and I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me on, Hannah.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, you 3. All right, so let's just go ahead and jump right into our discussion questions for today. This first question is for both Patty and Dave. In 2019, 94% of malware was delivered via email. What surprised you about email security when you began working in healthcare or the cybersecurity industry? Dave, why don't you start?
Sure. For me, I think the most surprising aspects were twofold. The sheer volume of dangerous content in email. The ramp up was marked and significant and notable once COVID became a global hot button that anyone could capitalize on. And secondarily, the sheer lack of education on the employee side. Well, I think that training is at least a benefit to have in place, and certainly something that's essential. This was a little bit like everyone is trained to do a 5K walk, and all of a sudden we're all doing marathons every day, and we weren't ready. Ultimately, controlling that content that comes in is the biggest lever that we have to pull, and I really think that's where the attention needs to be focused.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think what surprised me the most was how easy it is for people who are trying to breach security, especially through email. And there's a reason why most of the breaches happen to be through email, because it seems to be very easy to breach. So I think that was the part that surprised me the most.
And this next question is for all three of you. 63% of confirmed data breaches involve weak, default, or stolen passwords, meaning many people think that their email is safe just because they have to log in with a password. What is your take on this? Greg, why don't you go first?
Yeah, sure thing. Passwords today aren't cutting it. I think you need multi-factor authentication. There's a lot of breaches that have resulted in a compromised password, someone hacking someone's inbox and clicking the forgot password button and then accessing information within an encrypted portal. So multi-factor authentication, that's a best practice. I think that organizations should really start adopting this type of security measure.
Dave?
I agree totally. I think nowadays viewing a password alone as security for email is a little bit like viewing a cable lock on the front door of your house as secure. I'm a cyclist, so bike locks, cable locks is one of them. So no one can really just kind of walk in and push the door, right? But a cable lock is so easily defeated with hand tools. And similarly, a password, with the compute power that's available today, a password without multi-factor authentication is defeatable with time. And if that's the only barrier to the front door, then someone is gonna come in. I think avoiding SMS as a multi-factor is important. SMS can be spoofed. So having a complex multi-factor that is not spoofed is important. And I agree with Greg completely that MFA needs to be minimum best practice.
And Patty, what about you?
I don't really have a whole lot to add because I think that Dave really covered it. The encouraging thing for me, I think now is that people are more and more accepting and adopting of multi-factor authentication in every walk of their lives, both their professional lives and their personal lives. And it's for most apps today, people are using multi-factor authentication, whether it is your banking app or whether it is your, brokerage app or whatever it is. But when it comes to email, I think there may be some more distance to cover. But I think the general acceptance for MFA, I think, is very high, and that is a very encouraging sign.
I can tack on to that, Patty, just a bit, and I agree. I have a kind of a mostly software company background, which tends to lean towards a younger employee base. In the healthcare field and in home care, where I am, it leans towards a slightly more mature employee base. I came here 3 years ago, and we had we had about a 1-inch high technology stack. We had almost nothing, and we are entirely cloud-based. I moved this company within 12 months. That's nothing to do with me. That's a compliment to this company for being able to keep up that pace. And there has been zero pushback with MFA, and I use it for all. There's no other way to get into any application, including our door security system, which is mobile app based. So I do think acceptance is very high, and I don't see that as a hurdle anymore.
Yeah,
I totally agree. Dave, you mentioned this a little bit earlier when we were talking about our first question. How has the pandemic impacted your organization's email security?
Ultimately, I can say, and I can applaud Podbox here, there's been no real change because I was already a Podbox customer, and it has handled the volume without any issue at all. And so having that in place really was kind of the capable security net that I needed. I did ramp up some of my user education because I wanted them to have a little deeper toolbox should something come through. But other than watching the volume on the back end, the end user side has really seen no appreciable difference that's hit my ticket system at all. And so I'm very happy to be a customer with that in mind.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Patty and Dave, this next question is for both of you. Have you seen an uptick in spoofing or malicious emails since the start of COVID-19, whether within your own organization or colleagues' organizations?
I'm happy to go first. Again, we are a relatively small company, but I will tell you that we have seen a marked increase in the kind of attempts, the phishing attempts that you talk about. And again, it's just getting very, very real. And unless you are reasonably alert and technology savvy, it's very easy for you to be taken in by some of the more sophisticated type of phishing attacks. And these days, for example, we are on Office 365, and just like a lot of others are. And it's very common for me to see phishing emails come through, and they're not even caught by the filters on my email account. And I see that it's all got my company name and an Office 365 account, and some problem or the other that they say that I should address immediately. And over time, of course, you know that you just ignore it. But when they just start getting more and more creative, right? So sometimes I find myself spending a couple seconds on it before deleting it. And even that couple seconds means that they've succeeded in getting my attention for that extra second that I otherwise wouldn't have given them.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that a number of spoofing emails and phishing emails do leverage the one of the inherent weaknesses of Microsoft's encrypted mail feature, which is the fact that you have to log into it, right? So a lot of what I see, and this has been caught, by the way, but a lot of what I see are important COVID message, click here, important encrypted message, right? And so, and to your point, Patty, I mean, the graphics are immaculate, right? Like everything is copied so well, pixel for pixel, and that's an easy hook. On my side, my executive team has gotten a significant load. Again, I'll confirm that this is caught. So I'm looking at this from a report out of POBOX rather than getting it on the front lines. And on that side, there's been a significant uptick in mail to attempting to go to employee addresses concerning always important COVID things where they need some medical information, log in here to submit and all that stuff with a time sensitive nature to it. And so I before this meeting, I checked and I've had about a 9x increase in volume on that side.
That's a huge increase.
Yeah, like if any of that was getting through, I mean, that could be a nuclear bomb.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Patty, this next question is specifically for you. How do you think the current pandemic will impact the digital transformation that is currently happening within the healthcare industry?
Well, in many ways, the pandemic has accelerated digital transformation, and very specifically, the shift towards virtual care and telehealth models. And that obviously has implications for how providers and their patient populations are communicating with one another. So it's multiple channels of communication now. You're no longer just communicating through email, you're communicating through text, you're communicating through the website, you're communicating through SMS, and a variety of other means. Email, of course, continues to be a very dominant feature, but as we go more and more towards virtual care models, and as the workforce becomes virtual as well, because the pandemic gave rise to this this immediate shift towards a remote workforce model, and a number of them are going to remain remote. And so all of a sudden we have seen possibly an order of magnitude increase in vulnerability in different endpoints from a security standpoint. So I think all of that needs to be taken into consideration from an information security and a data security standpoint. However, the fundamentals of the business and the way the business is run is changing in a dramatic way, because it's no longer people coming into the clinic. A good percentage of your patients are not going to come into the clinic, and they are going to be taken care of remotely. And so what does that mean for your communication processes? What does that mean for all the endpoints and devices that your providers are handling? What does it mean for all of the data that is now being communicated through multiple channels? So I think that is where the order of magnitude of the scale of change is going to become evident.
Mm-hmm. It's going to happen as quickly as COVID happened, that's for sure. Greg, this next question is for you. What do you think is the most significant learning curve about maintaining HIPAA compliance when it comes to sending or receiving PHI via email?
Well, if we're talking about the learning curve, I would say actually it's as simple as understanding what qualifies as protected health information and when you're actually handling it. So PHI is anything that can identify a patient and is used in the course of their care. So some obvious examples would be medical record number, unique identifying number, an invoice with billing information, appointment reminders, blood test results, health records. And some other examples would include a simple name, a phone number, an email address, a birth date, social security number, even a picture of a patient could qualify as PHI. So be sure that you and your staff are both aware of what PHI is and when you're handling it.
Mm-hmm.
I can tack on there, Greg. You're right. The one part that really resonated with me is a name. So for instance, if we have Najoni Health and Greg Hoffman in the same field, if Najoni Health is a known healthcare provider, then you can make the assumption that Greg Hoffman is either a patient or somehow affiliated, and that now becomes, at a minimum, PII and probably PHI. So it is incredibly, a lot of people think it's, a long string of data to be a breach or to qualify, and it's not. It could even be, if you're the only Hoffman in the world, you're not, right? Then it could be Hoffman and healthcare provider X, and now that is unique, and that becomes an identifier.
Yeah, and even just an email address, right? Like if you're getting an email that has very specific information about a very specific type of treatment, well, then you could correlate that, okay, well, because you're receiving this type of email, you probably have this type of disease or you need this type of treatment.
Bingo. Yep.
It is a big learning curve. I know when I first started at Paubox, I had no idea that a simple name could be considered PHI and lead to a data breach for any sort of organization. It's a big learning curve, I would say.
The bar is a lot lower than many people would assume.
Yes, it is very low.
And of course, I just want to add on one more factor to all of this, which is this threat of ransomware, which has been scourge for healthcare in particular. And it's I think as an industry, because of all the technical debt that the industry has accumulated over the years, there's a higher level of vulnerability for breaches, and part of the manifestation of that is in the increased incidence of ransomware. And these are all well documented, and many health systems have paid their way out of trouble. There are lives at stake. So something we need to recognize as well.
Definitely. Which leads us into my next question. 64% of organizations have experienced a phishing attack in the last year. What is the most sophisticated phishing attack that you've either experienced or witnessed? Dave, why don't you start this one?
Sure. I can split this into two answers. I think sophisticated and impactful, and I'll kind of tack on to Patty's information there for the latter part. The sophisticated side for me has really centered on both the encrypted mail that click here to log in and receive your message is always from some important body that has a time sensitive nature. As we discussed earlier, the graphics are immaculate, sizing, color, everything. And that with Windows Update, employees seem to have a great urge to assist IT, which I can compliment them for. When they get a Windows Update message, right, they forget that any team is managing the device for them, so they don't need to do this. But with the O365 graphics, they're used to logging in, and it's not until after you press return and you never see that second factor hit that they kind of get that panic moment. What did I just do? And they've released, credentials into the wild. None of my employees have done this. I've got a lot of counterparts and peers in other industries that have, and that one I think is very sophisticated. I think for impactful, I've seen ransomware, and I've had that happen to some people that I work directly with, where they had an individual sitting at a core server who was phished, and then those credentials were used to trigger a ransom attack. It took them weeks, well over a month, to get out of hot water and to see the light of day again. And that was for their company size. They both had to pay and suffer the consequences reputationally of having, such a widespread impact. And so that is very real and very, very dangerous. I agree that healthcare in particular is at risk, both because of the weight of the situation. You do have lives at stake, both because of the well-known public penalty for paying. There's a wall of shame, right, that medical sites maintain, and there's also a per line item cost to pay your way out of there should PHI get released into the wild. And so that is a hot topic for ransomware, for sure. They are a target every day.
Greg, what about you? What is the most sophisticated attack you've experienced or witnessed?
Well, when I hear phishing attack, what comes to my mind is display name spoofing phishing attacks, just because these are so common and so effective. And in 2019, Palbox actually realized that this type of attack made up 91% of phishing attacks, and primarily because they're incredibly easy to do. Right, it's coming from a fake Gmail, AOL, or Yahoo email address. You can't really blacklist one of those domains. There's no link, there's no attachment, so there's no way to really flag the thing. It's just one human tricking another human using their fake authority. They change the display name to match someone of importance within your organization, maybe your CEO, your CFO, and they say, hey, we need money to be sent to us, sensitive data, direct deposits to be redirected. And so these can really do some serious damage because they're incredibly difficult to flag. Now, another type of a phishing attack that also kind of resonates with me is I had some family that was visiting from Thailand, and they plugged in the wrong website, and they ended up on some spoofed domain, and they had a support guy that wanted them to update their version of Microsoft, their version of Windows. And so now the guys pulled up like a note section with all their passwords and logins and is taking all this information down. So that's definitely something to be cautious of. They had to change all their information. It was an absolute nightmare. But luckily I heard what was going on and just shut the computer. But I think it was already too late by the time that happened.
This is an interesting one because ultimately it's about human behavior, and most of these attacks succeed because of sophisticated social engineering techniques that take advantage of human weaknesses and behaviors and manipulate humans into doing things that they would otherwise not do. So the solution is not just in technology, but is in changing human behavior and at least making people aware of how they could be exposed and how vulnerable they really are. It doesn't matter how high up or how low down in the organization you are. All humans are susceptible to some very common tendencies, and social engineering takes advantage of that, really.
Yeah, absolutely, Patty. And now, I mean, everyone's doing their shopping online, right? I mean, everyone's at home. So you got to be careful of making sure you're plugging in the right website, because if you put in if you have fat fingers and you type in the wrong thing, you could end up on a website that you don't want to be on.
I got to tell you, to your point, Greg, around the holiday time, I ended up reporting 3 different websites, Patagonia, North Face, and another very well-known vendor. People were shopping and they had literally copied the entire website. Again, graphics were appropriate. It wasn't until you got to the payment gateway that the very astute observer would notice that it was not a secure site. It was the most minor of thing that any average person, the shopping cart looked immaculate.
Yeah.
And so I told, all those retail vendors about these sites, and ultimately they were shut down. But you're right, with everyone buying online, like no one could go to a store, but of course they all want to have a holiday, and they're doing this on my corporate network. And so I was able to get that traffic and check it out. But out in the wild, I mean, that could be happening. And who's there to say, listen, this isn't correct? I mean, everyone doesn't have an IT team at home. That's unreasonable.
Yeah, it's good you flag that. I mean, these attacks are getting very, very sophisticated.
It was tricky. It took me a while to look. I mean, I looked at it and I was like, this looks fine. And like the scrolling was all perfect, but it was that last bit, like before you give someone your money, right? You check, and that was the only flag for me.
Yeah, we talk about multi-factor authentication. The one thing that maybe we didn't cover. One of the most one of the most common messages that I see is change your password. Your password's expired. And that's always, you know, a red flag for me. And then of course, you know, there's a list of messages waiting for you to view. These are all urgent, you know, go check, go click on them, and so on. Again, like I said, it just takes advantage of human anxieties, right? What's the last thing you need? The last thing you need is to be shut out of your application, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So
This leads me into my next question for you, Dave. Speaking of human error, how big of a factor do you think human error plays in email security?
I've got a bit of a complex answer here. I think the human element is both simultaneously our biggest attack surface, without a doubt. And then I'll contradict myself by saying I also see it as a bit of a non-issue. And what I really mean by that is that any human, you and I included, is fallible and invulnerable. We are a danger. We're the problem. You know, Patty nailed it, right? I mean, all these messages, like we can only process so much stuff as people, and we're vulnerable, and we don't have a good system for defending this stuff. But if you never show the vulnerability, something that's dangerous, and that's where the system comes in, as smart as possible, then you have minimized that attack surface to almost zero. Before Pawbox, I had at least monthly and maybe as much as 2x emails that were spoofing senior executives, myself included. And one of those instances, there was a check printed and ready to be sent, and the person in payroll happened to notice an anomaly in the address, and it was a 4-digit zip. They came to me to pull from our contact system the last digit, and I said, "Wait a minute, this is not real at all. Like, there's nothing to do with the zip. This whole thing is a problem." And that's what stopped it, right? And that happens all the time because people are so once I got the email away from people, once I got Pawbox in place, once the inbox was clean again, now the human element is reduced to as small an attack surface as possible. No system is perfect, but minimizing that as much as possible is where all the effort has to be done, because you could spend millions and millions of dollars on training, and you can't train someone to be perfect in that pressured moment when they're getting on the train in the morning. Well, less people ride trains, I suppose, right now, but when they're doing something busy in the morning, and to Patty's point, they get that update your password or something that is legitimate and normal looking and graphically perfect, and they click on it and they pop it in while they're holding their kid and walking their dog, and all that training is out the window because you can't cover those. Systems don't get tired, right? Systems don't get busy. They don't work too late or have children. And so that's really where the focus is for me. And so I see people as part of it, but maybe a smaller part than a lot of businesses do look at it.
Dave, if I may ask you, one of the things that I'm hearing is that this is now, this whole business of data breaches and cybercrime is an organized business, or a semi-organized business. What does that mean for enterprises, especially in healthcare? And as we all know, healthcare data has value in the market, and healthcare data is also easy to get relatively, compared to other sectors of the economy, which are a little more sophisticated in the way they protect and defend their systems.
Yeah.
What are you seeing in this regard in terms of just the sophistication of the efforts of cyber criminals?
I think along the lines of seeing the increases that COVID specifically has brought in, but you're right, as we march forward just in time, let's say COVID never was to happen, we can all have that dream, we would still advance in the same direction that you're indicating, right? I think from a tech perspective, you're absolutely on point that healthcare had a pretty low wall, which was kind of easily overcome initially. If you think about any software-based company that's protecting their IP, their code, there's been, since the dawn of code, there's been ways to have it fragmented and stored in myriad locations, and you could never assemble it all at once. And healthcare has always thought, well, listen, let's put all of our stuff in this one box. Let's put a complex password on it, and that's going to be great. And let's keep it in-house, right? Those are kind of three bad things all together, right? You've lost a cloud layer of security. you've probably got it in a location that is physically breachable, and then you've got it all in one location, which is a problem. And I think we're going to see, from a budgetary perspective, we're going to see funding for the tech side of healthcare, which had lagged significantly. For instance, I live in Boston, and a healthcare center of the country. I sat in a doctor's office not a couple of weeks ago at the hospital, at a cutting edge research hospital with a 4:3 aspect ratio screen. Like, that's a square monitor. I haven't seen one of those. Like, you can't buy one, right? I mean, everything is 16:9 for the last 10 plus years. And if that's a window into their technology world, that scares me quite a bit. Because if you got old hardware, you may have old thinking and you may have old tech. And so the funding has to go there, and then the talent will follow the funding, and then hopefully tech will rise to the occasion. Healthcare will rise to the occasion and keep tech on par with other industries that have had it there for some time.
Of course, there's one more element of this, just to take a second or two on this, is that the vulnerabilities are not just confined to the covered entities using HIPAA terminology, but it's also the business associates. In fact, more often than not, the BA and the business associates are the ones who are the points of vulnerability for a health system, the backdoor entries, if you will. Would you agree with that, Dave?
I would, because I think in the past, due to that lack of focus that healthcare has had on the tech side, I can tell you that I inherited some pretty loose BAAs when I joined Nijoni Health. You know, they had some kind of cut and paste language that was adequate for someone to put a signature on previous to me. And that does leave some holes open, right? So, I mean, Powbox has spent the time and made the investment to be high trust, which is a significant advantage in the marketplace and somewhat rare, which is unfortunate, because I think that needs to be something, a bar that more people reach to, more vendors, to have tight, infallible BAAs in place to ensure that both host and vendor are meeting the same requirements, and that they're sharing that risk rather than just closing a deal, which I think in the past, sometimes it's been sufficient to close the deal. So it's a smart area to look at, and you're thinking correctly that is a way in, because if you're going to put your data in, let's say, some cloud vendor for document management that has a loose BAA, right? I mean, well, if that's where you put all your eggs, then you better get a pretty secure basket.
Speaking of HIPAA compliance, Greg, what is needed for a business to maintain HIPAA compliance with email security?
Well, in order to maintain HIPAA compliant email, you must take the proper precautions to safeguard your protected health information, both at rest and in transit. So this means, and this kind of goes off of what Dave and Patty were saying, you need to use an email hosting provider that's willing to sign a business associate agreement with you to secure the data at rest. And then when you're transmitting PHI, you have to be sure that you're encrypting it, and you're using a vendor that also will sign a business associate agreement with you. The tricky part is ensuring that all the PHI that you send is actually encrypted. And this is especially true if you have a large organization. Not only do your employees need to safeguard that PHI that they're sending out, but they also need to be identifying that PHI that's sent to them. And either they're stripping out that PHI before they reply to that email, or they're encrypting that reply. Because although they may not have sent that PHI to them originally, technically, because they are replying, they are now transmitting that data across the internet, and they are responsible for securing it.
Mm-hmm. This next question is for Dave and Patty. How often should organizations be auditing their cybersecurity or email security practices and updating them?
I think.
Dave, I'll let you go. Yeah.
Sure. I think for me, I think annually is probably sufficient. I see this audit really is falling kind of in the line of your data backup. It's something that you want to be vigilant in testing and monitoring and utilizing to keep your eye on it. That way, when you need it, it's not a fire drill, right? And so I think ensuring that you've got the right vendor, I think that with your vendor, you've got the right process, checking your rules. I think annually is probably sufficient on this particular platform. Obviously, if you go kind of into a tier 2, tier 3 and lower, vendor, then you would want to keep a closer eye on that. And I would, for me, if I was making a very, very cost conscious decision to go lower in the vendor, I would ramp up my own monitoring and auditing.
Well, what I see my clients doing, these are health systems. I think the first thing they do is to make sure that they have the right kind of contractual agreements in place, and they look for the right kinds of certifications to be in place. And then, once you've ensured that whoever you're partnering with, in the context of partnerships with other technology vendors, whoever you're partnering with has the right robust security certifications in place and have the processes in place. And they go through a whole security assessment questionnaire that sometimes they can be deal breakers for these tech firms. And if you don't meet the expectations, you're not even in the deal. And that is especially true of smaller startups, for instance, that may not have paid a lot of attention to information security, but building a wonderful product. And so if they don't meet the expectation, enterprise CIOs are not going to let them in. And so that's the first level, that's the gate. So once you clear the security, and as a CISO's organization, they have their own assessments and everything, they have to sign off. And if they don't sign off, then the deal doesn't get done. So you have a really strong gate to get in the first place. And then, of course, what Dave said, you do an annual audit and you make sure you're doing it, and then you document it and everything, and you sit down with the vendors and have a conversation about whether anything's changed and anything needs to be remedied, et cetera, et cetera.
You're right about company size, Patty. At the size of Nijoni, I am subject to an external tech audit annually, whereas smaller companies and also companies in different industry verticals may not have that external audit as a nice annual reminder that, hey, by the way, someone's looking. And so you could have some accidents if you're not subject to an external audit. I like to push myself internally, but certainly I've got that if I get lax.
Dave, what is the expected email security behavior of your employees? How do you support them on this and educate them on these expectations?
My expectation for them is to be threat aware. I want my systems that I choose to be the primary, to be the 95% barrier against problems. And then I want whatever leaks through to be something that most people at least have an eye for what they're looking at. So for instance, socializing internally as part of our training, that no bank is ever going to email you for credentials, right? No bank is going to reach out to you to say there's a problem. That's a job for you to reach out to them. Like just the simplest aspects of understanding how these interactions would take place and when doubt should come in. No fellow employee or internal department or anyone is going to reach out to ask you for a social security number via email, ever. That's just not going to happen. And the big one, especially around the end of the year, is that there are no free Amazon gift cards. No matter what that email says, they don't exist, right? Don't click on it. With those foundational pieces in place, and again, around the holidays, I do some reinforcement. I kind of do a weekly outreach to keep that kind of socially aware that, and I also help them and I attempt to help them in their own, because I can't control what their Gmail or Yahoo account does, right? And so I can filter their enterprise account, but probably a lot of their email, especially around the holidays, is going to be personal. And the same rules apply there. Right? You're going to get all this stuff there because I can't stop it there. And so keep these things in mind. So we do regular training internally, kind of a once annual. I do socially reinforcement around busier times such as holidays, and then I really kind of look to my team to do the most. But I think threat aware is a phrase that I use throughout the company. That's the level I expect them to be at.
That is a good phrase to use. I think people will know what you mean when you say it, even if they're not very tech savvy.
Yeah, you can keep your eyes up, right, on the horizon.
Yes, definitely. Patty and Dave, this next question is for you. What is the top email security concern that your business has? Patty, why don't you start?
Well, mine is a relatively small business, and so we find that by essentially working within the Office 365 suite, we are relying on Microsoft to keep us safe. So that's really our default security strategy in a way. But enterprises, speaking on behalf of my enterprise clients, I think they, they have to probably think, even the ones that are on G Suite and Office 365, I think they have to take a good hard look at, what are the inbuilt security features and whether they need something more on top of that. That's kind of the high level question, really.
Mhm.
For me, it is a PHI leak would be leaking that to a bad actor would be my highest concern. Financially, that would be something that would be catastrophic to any company, depending on size. You're going to pay per line of PHI release, and that's really going to add up quickly if you look at any average spreadsheet. And certainly reputationally, that would be something difficult to recover from. So you've got future losses and possibly collapse, depending on the size of the breach. That to me trumps any leaked credentials. I happen to use Okta for my single sign-on and multi-factor, and with Okta and with a number of other comparables, you can elevate the level of duration of session and factor required depending on how deep into a system you are. So if someone was to get a credential and somehow get through any initial level of access with a username and password, like if they were to get to a server, for instance, just to kind of pick an example that probably couldn't happen, they would have a very limited session. They would have more than one additional factor required. And so like you can keep ratcheting it up as you get deep into a server. And so credentials, I don't think could hurt me too bad with that in mind. All systems use MFA, but any PHI in the wrong hands is something that's my primary concern as I look at systems, without doubt.
Greg, speaking of PHI, where do you think that most healthcare companies fall short when it comes to protecting it?
Well, companies will do their best to train their staff on how to identify PHI and encrypt it, but the hard part is ensuring that your employees are always following your training. I mean, let's face it, no matter how great your training is, there's always going to be the risk of mistakes and human errors. Some companies will decide, well, let's just encrypt everything by default that we send outside of our organization. And most of the time, this results in massive communication issues, frustrated recipients, and all around just inefficiencies. And the companies that I've talked to have gone this direction, for the most part, have reverted these changes rather quickly. Other companies will even roll out an email encryption solution that's going to scan their email and, based on the content, make an assumption whether or not that email or attachment should be encrypted. And this is supposed to catch the human error when they forget to identify and encrypt PHI. So hopefully this security feature will catch it. But the problem with a solution like DLP is that you're still going to run into false positives and the wrong emails are going to get encrypted. So although there are plenty of options out there, what these healthcare companies really need to do is leverage a HIPAA compliant email encryption solution that removes the encryption responsibility from their employees without really requiring them to trade their communication for a sense of security.
Dave, what is the user experience like for your company to communicate with patients and others before y'all switched over to Paubox?
Well, it's a word that no one in healthcare likes, but we all say all too often. We faxed, and it's just. I came from a lot of software companies, and I got to tell you, at my last two companies, I don't know if I was to be told to go find a fax is like some important part of my job, fax machine is some important part of my job in any of our buildings. I don't think I could have done it. I don't know if it existed. I hope it didn't. But the amount of paper that healthcare uses is incredible. Somehow paper has been decided as safe. I got to tell you that, and slightly off topic, I'll come right back, but I did have a hospital incident last year unrelated to COVID. And a week after I got home, I got a paper survey mailed to me, which had fill in the bubble answers. Now, I'll share, I don't even own a pencil. Like that survey was so useless to me, right? So we faxed, and I won't lie and tell you that faxes have gone away. We e-fax now. It's the same basic process. I know about 30% of the time our e-fax goes to paper at the receiving end. So healthcare is coming around. I really do think, as Patty mentioned earlier, that this year has really jump-started the move for technology for healthcare, which is fantastic. No one would choose this method, but fantastic as an end result. And now, of course, we can, once we convince our providers and fellow vendors that our email process is secure, many of them have now flipped to that, which is amazing. My fax, I no longer have any fax machines. When I first started at Najoni, we had north of 60 fax machines across 9 buildings. And at our headquarters, I can openly share because it's now behind us. I'm not going to name names, but people were faxing from one side of the office to the other side of the office because it was convenient. They had a fax machine on their desk. They pop it right in. At the time, we had an older email system that was confusing. So off it went. They didn't even grasp the fact that you actually pay per page with fax until I shared some bills internally. And so it's interesting, if we stay on topic here with Paubox is kind of so seamless to the end user who have been conditioned to the fact that encryption means portal, and everyone hates it. No one likes that process, but that's the conditioning. That's how I know it's secure, because I had to go to this special place, log in with a password that I will forget every time because I only use it once in a while from a certain vendor. And with Paubox, all that goes away. And the technology is magic because it's in the background. Kind of like Apple, right? You can give an iOS device to a very, very young child, and somehow innately they go in and they pinch and zoom pictures. And you never told them anything. And Paubox kind of has that elegance that you just send mail. Someone else is doing all the work for you, and that's the magic part. Now, with that magic, we have to have some very pointed and technical discussions with vendors to prove to them that even though you aren't doing anything, it is being done. And funny enough, I think maybe a month ago, someone at Najoni sent a ticket in that they were wondering if something was broken because they had to log into an email portal. I said, well, I thought our email was encrypted without us doing anything. And so I said, it's funny that you chuckle, Greg. So I said, yeah, actually, you're logging in to their email system. Ours is working fine, but they're asking you to do this. And they're like, oh yeah, we used to do that in the old days. I'm like, yes, we did. And so now, portals are mostly this kind of strange thing that was surprising enough. They put in a support ticket to my team because Paubox really has spent a lot of time smoothing all those wrinkles out so that people have no idea what's going on, which is the great part because they can't have any accidents. So, if the work is being done in the background, they can't use the wrong password or go to the wrong place or click the wrong link because of that magic that's applied. Faxes are still there, but boy, it's massively less, thankfully.
Well, you mentioned, Dave, that you don't use pencils anymore, but I suspect you do use an Apple Pencil with the iPad Pro.
I do, very much so. And I even use split screen, which a lot of people, amazingly, in the current version of iOS, you can do a split screen on an iPad.
Yeah, the sidecar, I love it, yeah.
I love it, yep.
Well, that concludes our discussion questions for today. I see that we have a message in the chat. There will be a replay. If you can email me, I'll add my email to the chat here in just a second. I just wanted to thank you again, Patty, Greg, and Dave for joining me. If you'd like to obtain a free trial of Paubox's email solution, I am going to add a message into the chat right now for that. And I hope that you all mark your calendars for our next event. It's Paubox's Spring Summit, Secure Communication During a Pandemic. This will be held on April 6th and is 100% virtual and 100% free to attend. If you register before this Friday, you will receive free conference swag, and I will go ahead and drop that link into our chat right now. I want to thank you all again for joining us today. I hope that you learned some tips and tricks that you can bring back to your organization. And if you'll need anything else, I will add my email right now, and you can email me for a playback. All right, thanks guys.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much,
Hannah.
Hannah. Thanks.
Have a
All
good
right, everyone. Take care.